There is a spiritual writer who gives us a way to pray. It's a very simple way to pray. It's maybe the simplest way I know to pray. It's where you get very quiet, go deep within yourself. Once you've quieted down and from deep within, you simply say the word you, Y-O-U. And you let it slowly, prayerfully bubble up from deep in our interiors. You. And you just do that for 10 minutes. You just let that word come up. And what happens then when a person does that and they can pay attention to their interior is the sense one becomes aware of the presence of God as a you within us. Not a thou far away, he, she, it, far away somewhere else, but as the intimate one who is within us, the you who is within us at all times. How in the world did we get the idea that we could live alone? If God is the intimate you within our spirits, who has poured his Holy Spirit into us, and he is always there as the intimate you within our hearts, who is closer to us than our own breath, how in the world do we get the idea that we could ever be alone? And that God, so this is what we do. We have built up a self as if it was alone, as if we could make ourselves be who we are all alone. And Jesus in our gospel says, we have to lose ourselves. Well, what's the self that we have to lose? Because we can't lose a healthy psychological self. We have to build that up. Psychology, the insights of psychology tell us that. We don't want to get into self-punishment. We know that that's a mistake that's been made in religion before. We don't want to get into self-hatred. That's another mistake. So we have to lose a self, but what's the self we have to lose? It's the self that thinks it can be alone. How in the world did we get the idea we could be alone? And that God would respect that kind of privacy. So how in the world did we get the idea that we could say to God, okay, God, I'm over here and you're over there, and I'm going to make some decisions here. I don't really need you to help me with those because I can make those by myself, and I want you to respect that kind of privacy. Just leave me alone, let me make my decisions, and I'll decide what's good about me, and I'll decide what's best, and then, then I'll go over to you in prayer sometime. That's a joke. That's like that joke of, what, you want to make God laugh? Tell God your plans. That's a joke. That we can say to God, you're over there, I'm over here, and you're going to respect my privacy? While I make all my own decisions and I construct myself to be the person I need to be, and then maybe I'll invite you in. You got to be kidding me. God is already with us, has already been with us before we were even born. We've never been alone. We've never been alone for 1 second of our entire lives, and we'll never be alone for a microsecond of our lives. Christ is the one who lives within us. Christ has always been the source of the desires within us, the pull and the drawing towards truth, that he's been the source of all the desires in us for the good, for the truth, for the beautiful, to be better, to try to make the world better, to try to be a person who loves. He's already the wellspring within us of our deepest desires. He's already desiring through our desires and dreaming through our dreams and wanting through our wants. How in the world did we get the idea that we could build up a self and ask God to respect that privacy? That's an illusion. And what we and we've all done it, let's face it. And what we've done when we do that is we build up an illusory self that doesn't really exist. We pretend that we can make our decisions as if we're making them all by ourselves. God's over there, we're over here, we're going to make our decisions. I'll just pull out my little calculator and I'll just make a cost-benefit analysis here and I'll just make this decision. I don't really need to talk to you about it, God, because I got this one. I'm making myself all by myself, the self I'm going to be, and you're going to be over there. But I'll invite you in. I'll go to church, I'll invite you in. And we make our decisions as if we make them alone. We make our judgment about ourselves as if we know what's best and what's worst about ourselves. Because after all, we did it our way. We're making ourselves all, so we know what's best about us and what's worst about us. And we face the difficulties and challenges of life as if we were facing them alone, as if we were just depending on our own resources, and our problems get bigger and bigger and our answers get smaller and smaller. And we construct this false self, this illusion of a person who can live their life and make their decisions and know what's best and worst about themselves as if we were alone. And it's a joke. It's a joke self. It's an illusion. We've never been alone. That self doesn't even really exist. If we would stop constructing that self, it wouldn't exist. It's the false self that we have to lose if we're going to follow Jesus. If we're going to take up our cross, if we're going to lose our life in order to save them, we're going to have to lose that false self. And so what would that mean for us? That would mean that we would have to stop making our decisions as if we were all alone. We'd have to start making our decisions in life like the movements of divine mystery moved our hearts. And sometimes if we paid attention to the movements of divine mystery in our hearts, we could notice if we were drawn towards certain things and we were repulsed by other things, and if we made our decisions with an awareness of the draws and the pull and the counterpull of the movements of divine mystery in our hearts, who would we become? Who's the self that we would then become? We don't even know. What if we were to begin to trust the movements of the God who is always an intimate you within us, and the movements of that Spirit as it is drawn and repulsed, and we began to form habits and make our decisions according to that, we would become a person that we can't even imagine, perhaps. We would become a person that we're not maybe even sure we want to be. We might become the person like in James, who was more actively involved in helping people than maybe we're a little scared of that right now. We don't know who we would be, the self that we would be if we would begin to construct ourselves with an awareness of the movements of the divine presence within us, and we began to make our decisions as if we were not alone. We were never alone, but God was always moving in our hearts. And we'd stop making our decisions based on just a cost-benefit analysis. We start making decisions based on the movements of God in our hearts. What would it mean? It would mean that we'd have to let go of the certainty that we know what's best and what's worst about us. How in the world could we possibly know what's best and worst about us when we have constructed a self by ourselves, about ourselves? We think we know. And what are the chances that's true? I would put money on it with anybody in this church that what we think, what you and what I think are best about us and worst about us is way off the mark. Because it's been us constructing that self that makes that decision. What are the chances it knows? When it makes that judgment as if it were alone instead of in the presence of God, saying, don't know what's best about me. I can't know what's worst about me. I have to humbly come to you and ask you to show me. what's best or worst about me. I have to let go of the certainty of that. I don't know. Will you show me? And so what I think that Jesus is saying in our gospel is that's the self we have to let go of. That's the self we have to lose. And of course, it's not, as Jesus says, it's not a, once we lose that self, and it's hard, because we have built that self up with our decisions over a lifetime. We've constructed it with our habits, and to let that self go will be a loss, and it will be painful. But if we let it go, and we begin to trust the movements of the divine Spirit within our hearts, that Spirit will begin to guide us into the self that is truly who we are, that we cannot even probably imagine at this point. And it's easy to forget that, especially if we feel guilty, especially if we feel cut off from God for some reason, especially if we feel like the challenges of life are pouring in on us and we're facing them all alone. It's easy to forget that we're never, ever, ever alone, and God doesn't respect that kind of privacy. We think that God, God, okay, I'm just going to have you, I'll let you into this part of my life here, but I want you to respect my privacy here. God doesn't respect that privacy. God's already the source of every good thing in us. How in the world are we going to get a private self? And so we keep coming here because it's easy to forget that we're never alone. That God is the intimate you within us that loves us and is closer to us than our own breath and wants to help us make our decisions and become the people, the true person that we are, as we give up the false person and let it go. And so what do we do when we come here? We come around this altar and we listen to the Word of God, and we receive the body and the blood of Christ, and we do the most intimate thing. We consume the life of Christ, and the life of Christ becomes one with us, our body, soul, and spirit. How in the world could we ever think we were alone if we're taking the Eucharist and consuming Christ and He is consuming us? We have to keep coming back here so we can remember that all over again. That person I think is alone, I have to lose that person and trust that if I will pay attention to the movements of the divine mercy of God within me, who will I become? I'll become someone maybe. What kind of an engineer will I become if I become an engineer with Christ? What kind of doctor would I become if I became a doctor with Christ? Not the doctor who makes all these decisions alone, but who makes them by listening to the movements of God in his heart. What kind of nurse would I become? What kind of teacher would I become? What kind of priest would I become? That's, I think, what Jesus is talking about. Is who would we be if we would start to live that way?